Springfield's Talk 1041. Hey everyone. Welcome to the show. Make sure my phone is off here. Okay, most certainly got that taken care of. Get all my things ready here. We're streaming live, KSGF.com. Also, YouTube. If you want to watch the show play out, you can do so. Observe us there. It's Springfield's Talk 1041. And I guess you can subscribe. Is that how that works?
Yeah, like,
I don't know.
subscribe, follow.
Follow, share,
Yep, there you go.
chat amongst yourselves in there.
Comment.
I never watch the comments in there. I just don't have the room with the monitors to be able to do that. So, but you see that
monitor.
people
Tell
comment
you.
in there. Yeah, every once in a while during a break, I will hear Sarah laughing hysterically over there, and generally it's because of something that one of you has posted in there. You got pretty sharp and cunning senses of humor. Pretty witty, many of you do, in a very cutting way oftentimes, which is hilarious. We like that. All right, so Donald Trump just continues to knock him out of the ballpark. It would be an interesting thing if you could, for a moment, live in the world of someone who only listens to media that tells you what you want to hear, that Trump is bad and awful, and then to wake up and then to be exposed to a lot of the things that have been going on. He was responsible for yet another hostage release, the final American hostage release from Hamas yesterday. Just an incredible reunion. There was a photo of him holding up a sign in which he had handwritten a huge thank you to Donald Trump. You think about the number of people that have, even people that Americans weren't focused on. It's not like during the Biden administration and you had a DEI basketball player over in Russia who decided to try to take a marijuana vape pen with her knowing it was illegal, and then she gets sentenced to a very, very hard time, relatively speaking. And like everyone in the world knew her name. It was like a countdown until she was going to be released. Trump is releasing Americans all across the world, or negotiating the release of Americans that people don't even know about. And so it's not as if there's pressure on him to do it politically because every day the media is focused on them. It's interesting the media doesn't focus on them, I suspect because they worry that he would look good if the world knew he was getting these people out. So they don't put any focus on them while they're being held hostage in whichever country they are. And he just does it. What was the one? It was a month ago or so. He had made a promise to the guy's 90-some-year-old mother that she had asked him at a campaign rally. My son is being held hostage. I remember that one. It was Iran or where was it? I forget which country, and he did it. And he got the guy out so the guy could be reunited with his mother. And, these just amazing stories, things that, like, how does this guy have time to do this stuff? This administration's getting no credit whatsoever for what appeared to be just, picking up a phone, making a phone call, and ending what could very well have been a nuclear war between India and Pakistan. I mean, that thing, like, for 2 weeks had been bubbling under the surface. You had back and forth escalation almost daily. You had escalation from one to the other. And at one point, when Trump was asked about it, he's like, well, it's, kind of between them. But then it became apparent that this was not just going away. You had attacks back and forth across the border, including missiles from one country to the next. And then over the weekend, Trump picks up the phone and, okay, figured out a way to put a halt to it, at least for the time being. Of course, you never know what's going to happen in the, today or the following day. But he does that. It's a listing, one thing after another. You've got the Houthis within the last couple of weeks standing down after a couple of years of constant attacks. I mean, daily attacks were occurring on U.S. military assets as well as commercial assets, not just the United States, but numerous other countries as well, with their private industries and those shipping routes that were being attacked by the Houthis. They stand down. The Iranians have been willing to come to the table to talk about, how it is to win some favor, to get the pressure off them from the United States. That's going to be a little more of a challenging one, but coming to the table nonetheless. You've got Zelensky and Putin at this point at least agreeing to meet on Thursday, and Trump's like, yeah, I may stop by. I mean, it's like this guy, it's almost sad that there are people that hate him so much they can't experience the historic nature of the things that he's doing. And I don't mean that in some sort of godlike way, like he's this superhero, but you have to acknowledge the amount of things that this guy has done. In our lifetimes, has there ever been a world leader that has managed to check so many massive things off a checklist? The things that Donald Trump will accomplish in any given week are, for most presidents, and this spans Republican, Democrat, that most presidents would maybe brag about for a term. Like, well, in this term, the big accomplishment was this thing. And in the president's second term, the big accomplishment, actually, he had two. Foreign relation-wise, it was this. And when it came to the economy, it was these are the big benchmarks of the administration. For Trump, just pick a week. There's like 2 or 3 every week. This announcement regarding the prescription drugs. Now, this was an announcement that came Sunday. You know, most people sitting around thinking, oh, I got to go to work on Monday. Here he's, like, oh, guess what I'm going to do now? I'm going to cut your prescription drugs by 80%, 30 to 80%. I didn't talk about it yesterday because there was not much detail yet on how this was supposed to play out. Trump has expanded on this a bit, and this is, I will say, it is an interesting new approach. And some are calling it price control, and that's not really what is going on here. Honestly, it is in the same vein as all of this tariff stuff, and it's about other countries, that the United States is suffering because of relationships, commerce-wise, with American companies and other countries. So it isn't a tariff situation specifically, but this is a situation in which we are talking about the United States being negatively impacted because of pharmaceutical companies' relationships with other countries. And so much like Donald Trump has taken an approach in order to try and level the playing field with numerous other industries by taking the tariff approach, this is a similar situation in which he looks at the pharmaceutical company landscape and the American consumer primarily, and how the American consumer has, for years and years and years, been subsidizing the lower prices that people in other countries get. And so he's like, all right, we're going to fix this. So I'll explain. You've got 2 levels. There's this sort of overview of here are the basics in terms of the approach and what it looks like. And then, of course, you can get way, way down into the weeds. But we'll go over the basics so you have somewhat of an understanding of what's going on. And David Hogg, the DNC folks, they have officially voted to overturn his election. Democrats, they're becoming old hat at this thing. Somebody gets elected, and they're like, yeah, we don't like it so much. So they just undo it. The party of undoing elections, that being the Democrat Party. Weather in a moment. Right now, the latest news update.
And the first alert forecast from Ozarks First meteorologist Tom Schmidt, sponsored by St. Clair of the Ozarks Home Improvements. Today we'll see patchy fog before 9 a.m., otherwise sunny skies with a high near 81. Tonight mostly clear with a low around 64. For your Wednesday, sunny skies with a high near 87. And looking ahead to Thursday, mostly sunny with a high near 86.
DNC panel voting to void David Hogg's election to the Democratic vice chair. That didn't take long for them to undo that election. Democratic National Committee's credential panel voted Monday to void activist David Hogg's election to vice chair of the party. See, I think this is presented from the wrong angle. They talk about voiding his... no, they voided the votes of their members. That's what they voided. Just like when they forced Joe Biden to step down so that they could have a redo in terms of the Democratic nomination process. It wasn't Joe Biden. I mean, sure, he did get screwed over, but you notice they never talk about the tens of millions of Democrat voters that donated money, that volunteered to work at the polls, that went door to door in order to encourage their fellow neighbors to vote for Joe Biden. Those are the people that really got screwed. They're just indifferent to those people. Same thing when it came to the delegates at the DNC after they discarded those tens of millions of Democrat votes. Then, of course, you have the convention, and this is where the delegates would come into play, and they were completely disregarded by having a virtual vote ahead of time so that there could be no other candidates that challenged whom it was that the party elites told the voters you will support. And when you have voters that are very dutiful lapdogs that say, just tell us whom's lap you would like us to sit, and we will do so. And then they do it. Fall into complete compliance. And so now the Democratic National Committee members, they all voted back, I believe it was the end of January, beginning of February, for leadership. David Hogg, they voted for as vice chair, but the elites decided, you know what, we don't care for him any longer. And so the credentials panel overturned their election. Hogg, who was elected vice chair in February, but has drawn criticism from some Democrat elites over his plans to spend $20 million to take down long-serving Democratic House lawmakers in primaries, Hogg saying in a statement after the overturning of the election, according to Politico, quote, "It's impossible to ignore the broader context of my work to reform the party, which loomed large over this vote. The DNC has pledged to remove me, and this vote has provided an avenue to fast-track that effort," he added. The committee, which claimed they found procedural violations occurred in the February election, also voted to oust Pennsylvania State Representative Malcolm Kenyatta as DNC vice chair. So they overturned 2 elections with one fell swoop. Hogg and Kenyatta, however, will remain at their post until the full DNC votes on whether to approve their removals later this year. Well, why? What difference does it make? Let's say that they vote to disapprove of the removal. They're like, you know what? We collectively have decided, we have all voted that we want David Hogg to stay in this position. We'll just overturn it. I mean, that's what they're doing now. That's what they did with Biden's election. This is the Democrat Party today. Voting is symbolic. You realize that if you're a Democrat voter. Your voting is increasingly symbolic. If you vote the way, and they'll tell you, here's how we want you to vote, and if you comply, then it'll stand. But if you don't, or even better yet, if you do comply but they change their mind, that was the brilliance of the Biden thing, is Biden was their pick. Biden was the guy that the elites told the voters, this is the person that you have to support, and then they changed their mind after the people complied, and then they were like, never mind. I mean, what a great political party these folks are. Christine Pelosi, a member of the Credentials Committee and daughter of former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, insisted the vote to void Hogg's vice chair election had nothing to do with politics. Oh, yes, no, nothing whatsoever. Pelosi wrote on X, quote, "First, I want to say clearly, anytime a Democrat says, let me be clear, or talks in the context of clearly, you know they're about to lie to you. First, I want to say clearly and explicitly, this decision has nothing to do with the service of any DNC officer, especially Hogg or Kenyatta. This is about a violation of parliamentary procedure that was raised in a challenge filed back in February by another candidate for vice chair." Now, it's just a coincidence that none of this was brought up until after David Hogg announced that he was going to infuse $20 million into some of these primary races in order to challenge Democrat incumbents in primaries that he felt were ineffective. Total coincidence that this little technical goof up that occurred back in February, that all of the weeks that have gone by and David Hogg was going around as the vice chair being interviewed, and none of this was brought up as a concern until he made that revelation. This is another character trait of the Democrat Party, is when they're doing something obvious, like overturning an election because they don't like the outcome, they will make these absurd claims that, well, I mean, no, it doesn't have anything to do with politics. It was just, we're just sticklers for the rules, Democrats, if anything, they're known for following rules and demanding that everyone follow the rules, like when it comes to illegal immigration and stuff like that. We're just known for such things. But everyone knows why this is occurring. I mean, they've been calling for David. In fact, you had, was it Hakeem Jeffries? Well, you've had a number of high-profile Democrats after he made that declaration who have openly said, we've got to figure out a way to remove this guy. So then they just do it, and they're like, oh, but it has nothing to do with that. These people are so inherently dishonest. And what I think is just a fantastic reflection of what makes up the Democrat Party today in terms of voters is that none of them fight back against this stuff. None of them say, hey, wait a minute here. That's not what we voted for. We voted for this person. You can't just go and throw our votes away because you don't like the outcome. Where is the outrage amongst Democrats? You want to talk about demonstrating cult-like mentality? The obedience of people en masse? That increasingly their votes are just tossed aside, and because it's their leaders, they are perfectly non-responsive. Just, okay, tell us what to do next. Springfield's Talk 104.1, I'm Nick Reed. Let's see. This is Pyramid Roofing Company talking text line in regards to yet another election being overturned by Democrats. This time, one of their own. It's always their own that they really work hard at doing this, and that's because there's no pushback. David Hogg, that was elected by members of the DNC as vice chair in February. The one of the what's the committee name here? It wasn't the full DNC, as the credentials panel. Smaller grouping of people voted to overturn it. The text noting, I never thought Hogg would be at the DNC for less than the time that he was at his failed pillow company. Yes, that I don't know the exact period of time that lasted. But for those that don't remember, David Hogg decided he was going to take on My Pillow as a company because spite. This was just, it's so telling about what motivates people on the left. My Pillow, Mike Lindell, he's known as a conservative guy, a Trump supporter. And David Hogg at one point decided he was going to take down the pillow empire by starting his own. Now, he wasn't motivated by a desire to put out a great product for people. He wasn't motivated by a desire, like, sometimes you hear these origin stories and, I remember my dad, he'd always wake up when I was a kid and he'd be grumpy, and he was grumpy, and I'd ask Mom, why is Dad always so grumpy and sad? Well, he doesn't sleep well, and he's got a bad neck, and I just always thought if he had a better pillow, and so, I just, my whole life grew up thinking if only Dad had a better pillow, and now I realize that, none of that stuff. It was because he hated Mike Lindell because of his politics. Spite. That's what motivated him. Now, it didn't last long because he, of course, had no clue what he was doing whatsoever, like most people on the left. They just think by virtue of their existence, they're brilliant, they're smart, they're wonderful, and just put me in charge and wonderful things will happen. And, of course, we see what usually happens. People suffer. So, yes, his little venture there did not. He exited not long after he made his big announcement of trying to take down a pillow empire out of nothing other than hatred and spite. Coming up, one of the hang-ups in the budgeting battle that Republicans are having is over what are called the SALT deductions. You may have heard of these deductions. SALT stands for state and local taxes. And what this SALT deduction is when you have, let's say, your property taxes on your home, the ability to deduct that from federal taxes. So you pay $40,000 on a home. In terms of, taxes, let's say you're really, really wealthy, or you live in a blue state where the taxes are very high, the ability to deduct that. Now, that deduction was brought down significantly during the first Trump tax cuts, and I believe that's when it was. But point being is there are a number of Democrats want that raised, the deduction level raised. And there are a number of Republicans that are saddling up with Democrats on this, and it's causing a problem. It's just one of the many areas in which we've got fractured difficulties within the Republican Party on this big, beautiful bill. But I want to explain where the problem is and why I don't like the SALT deduction at all. Now, personally as a homeowner, there's benefit for me, but I think that it runs counter to what is in the best interest of fiscally responsible people who vote for fiscally responsible people. Not everyone agrees, obviously. There are even some conservatives like, hey, it's a tax cut. I mean, we should always support tax cuts in whatever form they come. I just happen to disagree on this one. I'll explain why. Pyramid Roofing Company, talk and text line 447 KSGF.
Springfield's Talk 1041, the first alert forecast from Ozarks First meteorologist Tom Schmidt, sponsored by Wolfpack Cleaners, your residential and commercial cleaning professionals. Today we'll see patchy fog before 9 a.m. and then sunny skies with a high near 81. Tonight mostly clear with a low around 64. For your Wednesday, sunny with a high near 87. And looking at Thursday, mostly sunny with a high near 86.
Ozarks elder law, so very important, not just when it comes to the end-of-life stuff, though a lot of times we think to ourselves, well, I don't need to worry about that now. I'm not even retirement age. I don't know if you know this or not, but sometimes, tragically, people die unexpectedly. Or sometimes it's even an illness that comes on, and all of a sudden you find you have very little time, and you think, well, but I'm leaving behind a spouse, and so I don't have to worry about it so much. You do have to worry about. Listen, if you haven't done any planning at all, guess who decides where your stuff goes? If you know, like you don't have husband or wife, or but you do have kids. Guess who decides? Government. You trust them? No medical power of attorney. Government makes those medical decisions for you. How horrifying is that? It happens every day. And it's because people just don't oftentimes think about it, particularly when it comes to medical power of attorney. Even your spouse or kids oftentimes are not allowed to speak on your behalf. How frustrating would that be? You think, this is my mom. How is it that government can override what? Well, was there medical power of attorney done? What does that mean? What does that look like? This is why you need to reach out to the great people at Ozarks Elder Law and get that stuff taken care of. Find out what it looks like. Consultation, get it set up. And then when it comes to actually getting things set in place so you are protected, they tell you up front this is what it'll cost. It's not an hourly thing or half hourly or quarter hourly pay where they pick up a call to make they pick up the phone to make a call to get some information, and well, that's another $100. That's not how it works with them. Ozarks Elder Law, you can learn more by going to ozarkselderlaw.com. Also Nick's endorsements, KSGF.com. David Hogg, we were talking earlier. His election was overturned by the Credentials Committee at the DNC. It was in February that he was voted by the DNC delegates. And so it's another election Democrats have overturned, which they're becoming quite frequent at. And someone had texted in recognizing the little amount of time that he actually was in charge of that pillow company he founded in order to try to take down Mike Lindell. And apparently it was a month longer at the DNC than the pillow company, as short as his time was at the DNC. You said it was from February to April that he was...
February 4th through April 12th.
Yeah, February, March. So just a hair over 2 months, he was heading up that pillow empire of his to take down Mike Lindell. All right, SALT deductions. Now, this is an area in which you have a lot of, this is some of the Republican infighting. It's so frustrating, very, very frustrating as a Republican voter that is, or usually a Republican voter, but someone that just wants a political party that I can rely on to have fiscal responsibility. That's all. I mean, there are other things that are important to me as well, but it's very frustrating when that is not an option. Now, I may have an option to vote for someone who is fiscally responsible. Being in the 7th Congressional District, I have Congressman Burleson as my congressman, and he comes on. He's more frustrated than any of us at times because he is one of those Republicans that is up there fighting against the Republican establishment that wants to spin us into oblivion. And if you are somebody that wants to at least feel you have a chance, this is the thing about if there is a party that is fiscally responsible. If they're not in power, at least you have hope that, well, if they get in power, we can get things on the right track. Get out there, work, try to get them elected, cross your fingers, and then there's that hope. Well, all right, we can just make it another 2 years, get this party in there, and then start having some fiscal sanity. The problem is, with the people who run the Republican Party today, neither party fits that bill. It's just, do you want to have a political party in charge that is fiscally irresponsible, or do you want to have a political party in charge that's really fiscally irresponsible? There's no fiscal responsibility. And there's Medicaid reform issues. We talked about this with Congressman Burleson yesterday, a lot of this Green New Deal giveaway scam stuff. And what happens is, a lot of these Republicans that, they complained, they went out campaigning on how Biden raised inflation by all these corporate welfare giveaways for Green New Deal scams. But then when it comes time to repeal that stuff, oh, well, I got some donors in my district that benefited from that. Maybe we shouldn't, maybe just, sure, in the future we'll make sure not to do it again. But maybe we ought to leave it as it is. That's the reality of what's going on. Now, SALT deductions is another area of contention. And SALT deductions, I was correct. It was the 2017 tax cuts that lowered the maximum cap down to $10,000 for individuals and married couples. So this means that when it comes to your state and local taxes, homes are a big one, obviously. If you end up paying $14,000 in state and local taxes, you get to deduct $10,000 of it from federal. Democrats want that raised much, much, much higher. The reason that they want it raised much higher is because, of course, they're in states that have, generally speaking, much, much, much higher state and local taxes. You look at New York, look at New Jersey, look at Illinois, look at California. And, irony of ironies, they have a lot of very wealthy donors that pay a lot of taxes because they vote for Democrats to, have fiscal policies that result in very high taxes, and they want to get out of paying as much of that as possible as wealthy people, and so the higher the deduction, the less they have to pay in federal taxes. So when you look at it, what you have here, particularly with Democrats are literally pushing for tax cuts for the rich. Because if you are not a homeowner or you pay less than, you just don't benefit as much. Say if you pay $2,000 in state and local taxes, you get out of federal taxes to a much lesser degree than some rich person who pays $250,000 in taxes. There are a lot of people, and I understand this, that are lower tax people that say, yeah, but any opportunity there is in order to lower people's taxes, we should do so. The reason that I disagree with that when it comes to the SALT tax is because we are talking about people in states that a majority of the people vote for higher taxes. I don't believe they should then turn around and get out of paying the same amount of federal taxes that those of us in more fiscally responsible states have to pay because of this SALT tax. It absolves them of their responsibility. And it creates a scenario in which it fiscally rewards people who vote for Democrats that raise taxes. Because if you and I live in a state, when you think about people in states in, which just have very, very low property taxes, for example, and that is arguably going to be a red state. And so you have the people in a red state that are fiscally responsible and they vote for fiscal responsibility, and along with that comes much lower state and local taxes. When the federal taxes come along, okay, we got to pay this amount. Now, next door are their fiscally irresponsible brothers and sisters that vote for Democrats, that jack up property taxes, that jack up local taxes. And so the red state people are looking at them like, you fools. Don't you know you're taking money out of your own pocket here? And it's not like your states run any better. It's not like your services are any better. It's not so what fools you are. But then what happens is they rig the system with this salt tax, and then they turn back and they say, who's the fool now? Because we get to deduct these high taxes while you don't get to deduct. So we pay less in federal taxes than you do because our deduction is higher. Because of, the salt tax, and because we pay more in taxes, we're able to deduct more. Now, some may look at it and go, yeah, but they're paying higher in state taxes. But they should not then, in turn, get to pay less in federal taxes simply because they vote for elected officials that raise their state taxes. It forces the rest of us to subsidize their poor decision-making when it comes to voting. And so that's why I'm opposed to this. Now, and again, as a homeowner, as somebody, this is to anybody that pays state and local taxes, as long as right now, up to $10,000. Now, you've got standard deductions, and, this is a simplified way of observing it and discussing this. But ultimately, that's where the cap is right now. You can't go over $10,000. So people, and again, this applies largely to people in blue states that pay much more than $10,000 in state and local taxes. They want it to be much higher so that they can then pay less in federal taxes. Democrats, of course, are very supportive of that. Now, the problem that the Republicans are having right now is that you have a number of elected Republicans that are in blue states, New York being one of them, that also want that raised. You've got 4 House Republicans from New York, this is in the New York Post, fuming on Thursday over what they described as an insulting offer from House Speaker Mike Johnson to raise the cap to $30,000. So in other words, to triple it from $10,000 to $30,000. And they are demanding that it get jacked up to $100,000 for single filers and $200,000 for married couples. In addition to the fact that this forces Americans to subsidize taxpayers in blue states, it also becomes a numbers issue because you have the fiscally responsible Republicans that recognize if we're going to be fiscally responsible, these tax cuts, we have to make sure that they are, quote, paid for. In other words, we've got to cut spending. And this makes that more difficult because what you have are some of these blue state Republicans that want to jack up the SALT deduction, which means less revenue coming in, which means that it's more difficult to, for example, if you only have so many taxes you can, quote, cut, then you are looking at, okay, are we going to sacrifice no tips, no taxes on tips, no taxes on overtime? Where is it we're going to sacrifice it? And so it becomes a mathematical issue. Listen, I understand where they're coming from. When you have some of these Republicans in blue states, because they are going to have voters that they rely on for reelection, and they want to be able to go tell them come reelection time, hey, listen, I got your deduction raised. I fought for that, and so you pay less in federal taxes now because I helped make the SALT deduction increase tenfold from $10,000 cap to $100,000 cap. What I would much rather see Republicans that are elected do, explain to people in these states that are blue states in which they're elected, this is why you need to vote for Republicans instead of Democrats, because look here, you're desperately trying to claw back as many of your tax dollars as possible because so much are taken on a local level. And if we were a red state, you would not be relying on me on a national level to try to rebate you from the amount of money that these local Democrats are requiring to be taken out of your paycheck. That's the argument they should be making as Republicans. Springfield's Talk 104.1, I'm Nick Reed. opening the show, talked about what a different world Democrats live in when they rely on an echo chamber, MSNBC, Stephen Colbert, The View for their information versus what the rest of America is actually feeling. And if you listen to Democrats, it's very clear they think that everyone believes that it was a mistake to reelect Donald Trump. You can tell that they genuinely believe that. That everyone agreed there's just chaos and I bet you Trump supporters are happy now. Like, yeah, actually very much so. And in fact, that's what the most recent polling shows. Sifting through poll numbers to assess the truth, sometimes challenging thing, writes Nicarama, especially when so much bull is often being spread in liberal media. One of the most recent polls, Rasmussen. They have new numbers out that show Americans are very pleased with the direction that we're heading, in fact, to historic numbers. Rasmussen's Mark Mitchell commented on what they found in their polling. Quote, in 20 years, the percentage of people who say the U.S. is headed in the right direction has never been higher than it is today. 49% of Americans said that we are headed in the right track, 46% saying the wrong track. That is a 3-point net positive. The previous record was 48% with a net plus 1 positive. So never in the history of polling have you had so many Americans feel as if we're headed in the right direction. And by the way, that's higher than when Trump first got elected, and that's higher than it was a month ago. And it continues to get higher and higher and higher. Doesn't mean that everything is unicorns and Skittles. It doesn't mean that there aren't going to be problems, that there aren't hiccups and mistakes. But this fantasy world that the left chooses to live in which everyone just regrets electing Donald Trump president, is completely out of line with reality. And it's a positive. It is a good thing because it shows that increasingly people are rejecting what they hear from the media and instead are relying on truth and reality, and that is a positive. A traffic update, I'm Nick Reed. All right, everyone. Guess what we got straight ahead? Another hour of awesomeness. Also, news in 60 seconds. I'm Nick Reed. I want a great homeloan.com. Thinking about a home loan? That's where you start. Easy as that. You are going to go house hunting. You don't want to do that until you first get that letter saying, yep, this is what they're good for, because it's a weekend, it's an open house, the weather's nice, you done church, you gone, you ate your nice lunch, and you're driving around, it's 3:30, like, look at that house, let's check it out. And then you love it. It's incredible. It's awesome. Greatest thing you ever saw. Dream home. Everything about it's perfect. You make an offer. You don't yet have that approval letter. And then somebody comes in after you, and they make an offer, and they're like, oh, by the way, here's our approval letter. Done. Guess who wins? Not you. So even if you aren't in your mind determined, oh, we're getting a house today, but you're just even going to look, just go ahead and go through the process. The characters, their team, make it as smooth and easy as possible for you. And then you have the relaxed luxury of knowing and the benefit of knowing that if you do happen to come across a house, you're not going to lose out because somebody else already took that step that you did not. And it starts at iwantagreathomeloan.com because you do. Israeli-American hostage Eden Alexander, tragically the last American hostage of Hamas still alive, has been reunited with his family. The State of Israel posted photos and videos Monday of young Eden being reunited with family after more than a year and a half in hellish captivity in Gaza. Quote, there's nothing stronger than a family's embrace, Israel wrote. Welcome home, Eden. The Trump administration and Hamas negotiating a deal with Hamas ally Qatar and Egypt acting as mediators for Eden's release. Donald Trump posting Sunday on social media, I'm happy to announce Eden Alexander, an American citizen who has been held hostage since October of 23, is coming home to his family. I'm grateful to all of those involved in making this monumental news happen. Hamas actually followed through for once, and Eden was released. Trump shared a clip of Eden's parents' first call with their son since his release. Eden's family released a statement. When the news of the deal was first announced today on Mother's Day, we received the greatest gift imaginable, news that our beautiful son Eden is returning home after 583 days in captivity in Gaza. They thank Trump and his special envoy, Steve Witkoff, for intervening on Eden's behalf. There was also a pic, and it was touching photo of the son, and he had looked like one of those little dry erase boards or something, or maybe it was a piece of paper, and handwritten on it a message personally thanking Donald Trump for securing his release. I noticed a number of these headlines I see running across television. They can't really ignore this story, but the headlines I see certainly aren't along the lines of Trump secures release of, or American release due to Trump's intervention. It's more along the lines of headlines that make it sound like Hamas just decided to. Hamas releases. Hamas decides to release America. Like, you know what? They're not so bad after all. Look, we have one entity to thank for the release of this boy, this man, this young man, returning him to his mother on Mother's Day, and it's Hamas. See what great, kind, and compassionate terrorists they actually are. I want to talk coming up about the announcement, the executive order Trump has signed, and what it means and what it doesn't mean. Like most things with Trump, this is a brand new approach. It is not what some people initially feared or described as price controls. Price control is when government says, "Hey, you have to, you can't charge more than like we're setting the number." We see that oftentimes with left-wing politicians, Ocasio-Cortez, Bernie Sanders, when it comes to credit cards, wanting to set a maximum amount of profit that they can. Well, Josh Hawley's with them on that. But that's what a price control. It's what Kamala Harris campaigned on when it came to inflation. She was going to put in place price controls where government would decide, as a company, this is the most that you can charge, or this is the most in terms of a profit you can make. Well, that isn't what this is. So what it is, we'll talk about coming up, and it doesn't have to be overly complicated. Some say it'll work. Some say it won't, like most things. But I will say the one thing, in Trump fashion, it is different in approach, which is what Trump, again, does. If he sees something and an approach, and that approach does not work, let's try something different. Even though the answers aren't always the right answers, it's just so refreshing to have a person in government who doesn't do what most people in government do, and that is when something doesn't work, well, we need to do more of that. Well, the problem is we just don't have enough money. We got to do more of it. That's what's going to fix the problem. Homelessness, that's a perfect example. We've got to solve homelessness. How do we? Well, we need $10 million, and we're going to do this program here. Fast forward 5 years later. Well, we didn't cut homelessness. In fact, it got bigger. What do we need to do? Well, what were we doing before? Let's do more of that. Instead of 10 million, we need 50 million to expand that program. Oh, and then fast forward 5 years. Look at that. Homelessness got even, bigger. It didn't get, well, let's continue to do more. Failed education, same thing. Government involvement in medicine, same thing, in terms of Obamacare. It's just same approach over and over and over again. Latest news update.
And the first alert forecast from Ozarks First meteorologist Tom Schmidt, sponsored by St. Clair the Ozarks Home Improvements. Today we'll see patchy fog before 9 a.m., otherwise sunny skies with a high near 81. Tonight mostly clear with a low around 64. For your Wednesday, sunny skies with a high near 87. And looking ahead to Thursday, mostly sunny with a high near 86.
Got a few junior suites available for our Great Escape coming up in November as we broadcast live from beautiful beaches. It's one of the great things that we get to benefit from when it comes to these Great Escapes is I think virtually every show that we've done from any of our locations, you can at the very least hear the ocean, if not just flat out see it by being there on the beach itself. And this is a new resort, not just to us, but relatively new, built in and opened in, I think, 2022. It is a Riu Palace line, and that, of course, is very exciting, and we'll be excited to find out what the setup of the show is. It's always great. It's nice to be able to sit there and, have some breakfast, have some fancy coffee, have a beer if you want. I always like to have a beer at least one show for breakfast. People, they're like, oh, mimosas and Bloody Marys, and oh, you're going to have a beer? Like, wait, you get a Bloody Mary, a mimosa? How does that work? That somehow is perfectly natural for a morning drink, but I can't have a beer. I reject that premise, and I actually do reject that premise when we do the show. But you get to do it your own way, however you want. We do the show 3 days while we're there. Of course, you don't have to be there if you don't want to as we broadcast live. Maybe you want to sleep in really late, or you have some other excursion, or if you want to be on the show, I always open it up. The show is all of ours when we go on the Great Escape, so you can be part of it, even if it's just to say hi to those fools back at home who decided, no, I don't really want to go. And it's going to be second week in November, so there's a good chance it's going to be cold and rainy, maybe even snowy. I swear, every November it seems as if we go on these trips, we come back and there's snow on the ground. And so we'll be there, and it's always mid to upper 80s, beautiful weather, white sandy beaches, and it's all inclusive. So for just under $2,000 per person, you'll join us for this week-long event, 6 nights, and that covers your airfare. It covers the all-inclusive nature of the taxes and transportation fees and the tipping and food and beverages, alcohol included. Your room has room service. That's covered. A mini bar in your room. That's covered. A liquor cabinet in your room. That's covered. Everything's covered. It's a fantastic way to do it, and, of course, a lot of great people that go on these Great Escapes. If you want to get your reservation for one of the last junior suites that are available, you can go to ksgf.com, Great Escape, and you will see the information necessary there. And ultimately, it results in you reaching out to Cam at the travel group, and she arranges all of this for us, and she will answer any questions that you may have so you can get yourself signed up. Trump going to war with pharma. Our country will finally be treated fairly. Announced the plan yesterday on Truth Social. Noting or maybe it was the day before the announcement came, but it's a string of announcements and executive orders over a couple of days. And he noted on Truth Social, the pharmaceutical drug companies would say for years that it was research and development costs, and that all of these costs were and would be for no reason whatsoever borne by the suckers of America alone. Campaign contributions can do wonders, but not with me and not with the Republican Party. We're going to do the right thing, something the Democrats have fought for many years. Therefore, I'm pleased to announce that tomorrow morning, this would have been yesterday, in the White House, 9 a.m., I will be signing one of the most consequential executive orders in our country's history, prescription drug, and pharmaceutical prices will be reduced almost immediately by 30 to 80%. They will rise throughout the world in order to equalize and, for the most time in many years, bring fairness to America. I will be instituting a most favored nations policy whereby the United States will pay the same price as the nation that pays the lowest price anywhere in the world. Our country will finally be treated fairly, and our citizens' health care costs will be reduced by numbers never even thought of before. Now, most free market people recognize that government getting involved is never beneficial. It never works out for the consumer. Now, there may be one area that artificially is appearing to be beneficial to the consumer. Let's say price controls, for example. On any, and this isn't price control in the traditional sense. We'll get to that in a moment. But let's say government decides, all right, this particular industry here cannot make any more than this, and they can't charge any more than that. Consumers are like, yay, we don't have to pay as much. All of a sudden, you have shortages. And for a number of reasons, largely because, well, if that's not as profitable any longer, we're not going to make that any longer. Some companies may, or they will shift production to other things that they can get a higher value out of, and so you end up with diminished product. And so overall, the one thing that we know is that the free market system overall, overwhelmingly, benefits the consumer because, for those who love democracy, this should ring to you, it is democracy at hand. People vote with their pocketbooks. And if there is something that is too much for a consumer, then you have less people purchase it, and somebody else will come along, and they're like, you know what, we'll sell that product, but we'll sell it cheaper because consumers, we believe, are wanting to buy it, but they just have it priced too high. And so then you end up with competing companies that are trying to win over consumers, and you do it by having the best product possible at a price that people find to be so it's always about the consumer when you're talking about free market. The problem that arises is when part of the marketplace, or in a significant, sometimes a majority of the marketplace, is in countries that do not have free market systems. Because suddenly, people who are in the free market system become, the environment becomes tainted by those involved in that particular product purchase as a consumer that are not in a free market system. So we get impacted. That is what has happened when it comes to pharmaceuticals. I remember during the Clinton years, this was a big deal. It's like people would get drugs out from Canada. They couldn't figure out why is it that the same drugs that I buy here are so much cheaper in Canada. Well, it's because Canada had price controls in place. Canada said this is the amount that will ultimately be charged for consumers, and so if you have a country that says, okay, well, we'll allow you, this is a simplistic way of looking at it because there's different forms of enforcement, but all right, here, we'll allow you to sell your product in our country, but you have to do it at this lower rate down here. Well, if that is going to be ultimately, when it comes to the bottom line, some sort of a loss, then they have to make it up somewhere. Guess where they make it up? They make it up with us because this is a free market system. And we're the one place that they can. And what has happened over time with the United States is that because we're the free market system and virtually no other country is, we are the ones that are subsidizing the artificially forced lower rates of prescription drugs in all of these other countries. Now, you add into that research and development, which is a huge portion of it, and it's part of the reason that they make the profits is so that they can utilize it for research and development. Now, some people want to dismiss that and portray it as trying to make the pharmaceutical companies look good. Oh, you're just trying to make them look good because they're out there trying to, find cures for new. Well, that's their moneymaker. Of course they're trying to do that. That's one of the great things about a free market system is when you can make money by curing diseases, you try to find ways to cure diseases. It's a fantastic formula. And that ends up occurring primarily here in the United States because we have the most free system in place. So they're allowed to make enough profit in order to put into research and development, while other countries not so much, some not at all. There's been, the pharmaceutical industries have been really putting pressure on European countries lately to really loosen up a lot of their rules and regulations and caps and so forth, because it is becoming increasingly difficult to develop any drugs over there. And they have been saying for some time, we're going to go to the United States. You add into that tariffs and so forth, and it's becoming increasingly likely a lot of these pharmaceutical companies are going to move to the United States. Now, what is the downs? We've got to take a break, and then I want to explain what Trump's approach on this. It's not to say, okay, you can only charge this much. It's to say, hey, whatever it is that, like, the whatever you're going to charge everybody else, it's got to be fair for the United States. So you're charging, what's the least you're charging some country over here? Okay, well, that's what you can charge in the United States now. So it's your choice. I mean, you can lower prices here, or you can raise them over there if you want to. That's your choice. And so it's this unique approach of Trump taking the world stage, free market system, more so free market system in the United States, and the industry in all of these other countries that do not have as much of or any free market system at all. And Trump sort of forcing this free market approach by telling the pharmaceutical companies, listen, you can decide if they pay more or we pay less, or you meet somewhere in the middle. So you guys figure that out. But either which way, he figures ultimately that it's going to result in, to some degree, prices becoming lower for citizens here in the U.S. Now, what are some caveats? And some of the arguments against it lay that out. Just it's some pretty basic, simple stuff. Pyramid Roofing Company, talk and text line 447-KSGF. I'm Nick Reed. Streaming live, KSGF.com. We've got a traffic update, then 90 seconds. Have a weather update, and continue on. Just halfway through. Still got the other half to come of Credible Radio. Any of it you miss, of course, KSGF.com, the app, and then Spotify, iTunes, and other places too, I'm sure.
Springfield's Talk 1041, the first alert forecast from Ozarks First meteorologist Tom Schmidt, sponsored by Wolfpack Cleaners, your residential and commercial cleaning professionals. Today we'll see patchy fog before 9 a.m. and then sunny skies with a high near 81. Tonight, mostly clear with a low around 64. For your Wednesday, once again, sunny skies. We'll see a high near 87. And looking at Thursday, mostly sunny with a high near 86.
Trump signing this executive order yesterday, which is something, incidentally, that he embarked upon in his first term, but COVID happened, and so this isn't really anything new for Trump. He's signing this executive order that isn't telling pharmaceutical companies how much they can charge for drugs, but telling them, hey, if what all the other countries in the world, whatever the least amount you charge over there, the U.S. has got to be in line with that. And this is a response in recognition to the fact that the United States, that we pay more than people in other countries do. Now, there are a number of different reasons for this, but it's largely because of government. And a lot of other countries, and this is deliberate, they downplay the significance of a lot of these drugs because it costs money. This is part of the problem with government-run healthcare, is they have a bottom line. As much as people want to believe that it's just free, government says it's free and magically it doesn't cost anything. It does. It still costs something. And when you take competition out of it and the government runs it, then the government gets to decide what drugs you get and what drugs you don't get. And so there is a diminished value put on a lot of these drugs in a lot of these other countries because of the cost. And they essentially, in the narrative in society, is one of which oftentimes patients don't even know some of these drugs exist, as opposed to those of us here in the United States of America. You also have many of these countries that they're the ones who buy the drugs. It's not like here in the United States where you want a drug, you want some sort of, whatever it might be, and then you go purchase it. Now, you may have, you've got the insurance component in it, and you have a doctor that signs a prescription for it. But when you're talking about government health care, you don't have any of those availabilities. What happens is the government just buys up a certain amount of the drugs, and then the government decides who gets it and who doesn't get it. Some people love that because they're told it's free. Other people recognize the horrors of it. But nonetheless, that's the way it works. And it is part of the reason that when people talk about, I don't understand why drugs are so much cheaper in other countries. Well, it's because the government forces it. So this is where Trump is like, okay, you guys have to figure this out as pharmaceutical companies. If you want to continue, you can do a couple of things here. You can renegotiate with these countries. Just tell these countries, listen, we have to charge you more because we can't bring the cost down that much in the United States. We can bring it down some, but let's meet somewhere in the middle. Drug prices will go down. Now, this is ideally how they are arguing that this will work. The drug prices will come down to some degree for patients in the U.S. They'll have to come up a little bit for you over there in, France and Germany, Europe, whatever countries it is. And if you aren't willing to do that, well, then I guess you just don't get this drug. Now, the part of the reality for the pharmaceutical companies, and this is to the detriment of citizens, is some governments may say, all right, well, we just won't take that drug anymore. Not out of any protest or anything, but it's government. So when you and I oftentimes see these drugs as life-saving drugs and how significant and important they are, governments, it's just all numbers. And so you may have some governments like, we just won't buy that drug anymore. It's fine. We'll just use that money elsewhere. There is also rebates that come into play. Now, this is where a lot of people say, here's a flaw in this approach, because these countries in which governments do the purchasing or they set the prices for the purchasing, they can rig the system. And in fact, a lot of them already do, in the sense that the pharmaceutical companies or the drug companies or the government's like, okay, we'll buy it for this much. But part of the arrangement is that the pharmaceutical companies give them a rebate back. So just making up numbers. Said country says, we'll buy these drugs for you, a year's worth at $50 billion. But we need a $30 billion rebate. So on paper, yes, they're being purchased for $50 billion, but the pharmaceutical companies are actually rebating them. And in a lot of these countries, because of the laws that they have, those rebates cannot be disclosed. And oftentimes because it's government doesn't have to disclose it. Well, if, of course, that ends up being the case, you can make it appear as if people here in the United States are paying the same amount as people in some of these other countries, but in reality, we're still paying more because secretly, I'll use the term secretly, in an undisclosed fashion, the pharmaceutical companies are taking some of the profits and they're just having to run it back under the table to these countries. Now, how is it that you prevent that from occurring? Don't know. I think, like a lot of things, Donald Trump's approach is, hey, you need to get creative and figure this out, because that's Donald Trump's approach to things, to problem solving. It is, okay, this is a situation. Let's try something different. Let's try something we haven't done, and you guys figure out something different. Try to figure this out. And then whenever, again, classic Trump approach, if there are problems with it, you readdress it. This is different than a situation in which you're talking about a product or service that is available and only impacted by a free market system, and then government coming in and saying, no, you charge too much, so we're going to start making these decisions. This is a situation in which, number one, the free market system already is so tainted here in the United States because of insurance companies and third parties. And so we don't even have the traditional customer-focused free market system to the degree that we should when it comes to pharmaceuticals in this country. That aside, however, we get dragged down further in terms of cost efficiency and effectiveness because other countries are utilizing their own forms of non-free market system in order to artificially suppress the cost of the drugs, which you and I end up paying for. If we, ideally, the entire world would be a free market system. And what you would have ultimately is, overall, globally speaking, a system in which you would develop the most advanced drugs that would come down to the most, it would be the most affordable price. And I'm talking relatively speaking. Some would say, well, the most affordable price is zero. I'm talking about the most affordable price in the context of allowing a company to still exist and produce the product and a consumer that's willing to pay for it at a particular price. That's how everything in the free market system works. Toothpaste works that way. Deodorant works that way. Televisions work that way. Cell phones work that way. Pencils work that way. You can go down the list. But anytime you're talking about a product or service in which you start getting governments involved and governments that are dictating prices or governments that are saying, don't worry, we'll take care of it for you. We'll just pool all your money together and then we'll distribute the product to you in the way that we feel is best. Anytime that happens, you massively jack up the system, you end up with artificially high prices, and you end up with diminished product, oftentimes because it takes a ding on research and development. It's just a system that is jacked up. And is this going to work? We'll see. Will it actually bring down prices of prescription drugs in the United States? We'll see. And if it does, Will it be at the expense of other things like research and development to a degree that is detrimental to the consumer? That one is a little more difficult to tell because you don't really ever know what would have happened otherwise. So in other words, you don't know if this plan wasn't in place, what drugs would have been developed that otherwise aren't. That's just something that you can speculate on. Springfield's Talk 1041, I'm Nick Reed. Sarah Myers.
Thank you. The Pyramid Roofing Company, Josh joined us on Friday, and he talked about some of the common questions that he gets, and a lot of them have to do with insurance. Should I wait to file a claim? Should I even file a claim? And another one was, will you pay my deductible? And Josh explained that is illegal and it's insurance fraud. So if a roofing company is out there telling you that they're going to pay your deductible, they're scamming you. But one thing that the Pyramid Roofing Company will do for you is they will actually work through that insurance process without making you sign anything, which not all roofing companies do that, by the way. They get that getting a new roof is not necessarily a fun process, if you will, so they really do try to make that process as simple and as stress-free as possible. So if it is time to have the Pyramid team out to your home, give Josh a call today. You can find all of the contact information for the Pyramid Roofing Company under the Sarah's Endorsements tab at ksgf.com.
Regarding the pharmaceutical companies in this executive order, a number of you sending in text messages on the Pyramid Roofing Company talk and text line. One noting Trump needs to sign an executive order that bans pharmacy benefit managers. I've heard from a number of owners of pharmacies, particularly local pharmacies, about the pharmacy benefit managers and how problematic that is from their perspective. Another saying, I wonder if other countries have ads that say, ask your doctor if it is right for you. Oh, before I address that, I want to say one of the other problems is this process that I hear about this quite often, as you may have as well, that the process of getting approval from the FDA, from the government, the cost and the amount of time that takes. Now, that's a problem internally here. That doesn't necessarily have any sort of factoring of what Trump is doing with these other countries, but there are many that argue that that's just one of the many spokes within the wheel of inefficiencies that we have here in the United States, those burdensome regulations, and then incestuous relationships with people in the FDA and some of the companies, and it's you look at everything medicine in this country, and virtually everything that is connected to cost has nothing to do with the consumer. Now, they may say theoretically, oh no, because we're doing this for the consumer. But it's never ultimately the people who develop the best relationship for the consumer is the direct relationship without any outside interference with the producer of whatever the product or service is. That is the best that you can get. Absolute best. Every additional interference that comes into that is a diminishing of the product that the consumer gets. And ironically, it's always done in the name of the consumer. No, it's to make it better. It's to make it safer. It's to make it cheaper. And it always does the opposite. And when you think about from hospitals to doctors to pharmaceutical companies, that I other than maybe like certain plastic surgeries, certain cosmetic surgeries, which the price over time and the advancements in those technologies has dropped significantly, and that's because government's not involved in the level that it is with all other forms of medicine. Other than, that exception, you think about how clogged up, how many points of interference there are between the provider of the good and service and you as the consumer, even with doctors. And by the way, doctors don't like that. Doctors that get into medicine because they wanted to get in there and they see people and have patience and they think about, this ideal situation that once upon a time was in this country where, you start out and there's this young person that comes to you because their parents came to you and you've known them their whole life and every about their health history, and every interaction with them is with them. They have some situation, you're helping them with it. They, pay you for it. And then, one day perhaps you retire and you pass your practice on to another trusted doctor that's been part of your system for a while and they know your patients. Those things don't exist any longer. Now, with that being said, we're seeing a number of, and Dr. John Lilly is part of one of these, and there are a number in the area that are working to get back to that system. And it usually involves you pay a monthly fee, and with that, you can, within 24 hours, get a visit, sometimes the same day, at least over the phone, or over a Zoom if need be. And it's getting back to that patient doctor relationship without the interference of insurance companies. Listen, everybody looks at every one of these institutions, pharmaceutical companies, insurance companies, hospitals, doctors, and they look at ways that the patient gets screwed over, and it makes them angry at the person screwing them over. But what you've got to, well, you don't have to, but the reality is, generally speaking, whenever you have any of these entities, doctor, hospital, pharmaceutical companies, insurance companies, screwing over the customer, you the patient, it's because they're catering to one of the other outside forces. It's because and sometimes it's by force, they have no choice. It's because you are not their top priority. It's complying with this government mandate. It's complying with this insurance request, or for the insurance company, it's complying with or trying to comply with the government mandate. Everyone in this whole web it's like a big giant stage filled with people on the Jerry Springer show. And virtually every year that goes by, there's a new layer of relationship that is, okay, this entity over here says this year you got to change and you got to do this and you have to do that and that. And then that entity over there says, okay, well, we're going to tell you, you have to do this. So you have government telling, insurance companies, and you've got hospitals telling doctors, and you have insurance companies telling hospitals, and you have hospitals that are trying to get government officials to do this, and it's all of these relationships. Yet what one it should be the primary one is missing. It is the ultimate creator of product and service in the consumer. It's there in the end, but it's not who it's not the master. The consumer is not the master that's being served. And when I look at this system and recognize the way that it is, that cliched saying, don't hate the player, hate the game, that's what we're dealing with when it comes to medicine in this country. I mean, you can hate insurance. You're going to hate pharmaceuticals. You're going to hate your doctor because, you sit in that room for 4 hours waiting for him and you showed up on time and here they came in and just went down a checklist and, you met with the PA for 20 minutes, but then the doctor comes in for 2 and you can hate that doctor. You can hate, but they are surviving within this labyrinth of convoluted rules that have been built year after year after year after year after year. And that doesn't mean that they're all perfect, innocent people that strive or entities that strive to do the absolute best as possible. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that you can't. You cannot. None of these people in this system overall as it exists today can make you as the patient the number one priority. They cannot do it. They're not allowed to. And again, ironically, for the most part, that's because government for decades has been involved with the proposed outcome of making you the number one priority. Springfield's Talk 104.1, I'm Nick Reed. What are the other text messages regarding pharmaceuticals, pharmaceutical companies? I wonder if other countries have ads that say, ask your doctor, is it right for you? Now, there are a lot of people who think that, they say, well, I'm for the free market system and freedom of speech, but I don't like all these pharmaceutical companies that are allowed to run these ads. Now, once upon a time, they weren't. I grew up in an era, as many of you did, where these commercials were not on television. And I believe that it was because of laws that were in place. Now, I could be wrong about that, but what the shift, let me tell you why ultimately the shift took place. It was because, as a culture, we felt it was unfair that the only way a patient was aware of any particular sort of drug was if the doctor as the gatekeeper decided to share that with them. And the reason for that was because how did doctors know about it? Well, you had pharmaceutical companies coming to them. And we all know, the pharmaceutical company, they wine and dine them, and maybe they give them gifts, and I'm sure those regulations have tightened up over time, or send them on these lavish trips and so forth. And so there was this cultural rejection of the idea that doctors should be the gatekeeper, that all of us should know about those drugs. And then we can decide if we want to ask about them. Otherwise, you had a system that was vulnerable to doctors only telling you about what could be life-saving drugs from pharmaceutical companies that might send them on fancy trips. or give them, take them out for fancy dinners. And so you may lose out as a patient on something that could increase your quality of life simply because that pharmaceutical company didn't win the favor of the doctor. And so the idea was to allow people, citizens in this country, to directly learn about those drugs. And that was the reason that we shifted from that previous model to the one that we have today. And like most things, what we ask for, then collectively we bitch about it because we don't like it either. And then we demand like we're supposed to go back to the other way. That's a human nature thing. News in 60 seconds. Emily Johnson, House Theory Realty. If you have a home to sell, well, Emily Johnson, House Theory Realty. She's the one you want to go through. What if you're looking to buy one? The same thing. What if you know someone who's looking to buy or sell one? Emily Johnson, House Theory Realty. What if you drive by a house and they've got a sign out front and there's already, well, they already have a reel. There's a person's face and a phone number. Emily Johnson, House Theory Realty. Reach out to her and ask for her assistance. And I can't stress enough, if you are planning on putting your house on the market, when it comes to pricing it properly, so important. Here is a huge hole people fall into. They think, and maybe you've done this on Facebook Marketplace, right? Like, I got this vintage sweater I want to sell. I mean, I could probably get $20, but heck, I'll put it up for $40 just because you never know. And if no one buys it, no harm, no foul, I'll lower it down to $20 and sell it. It doesn't work that way with homes, because what happens is whenever there is a price decrease, the consumer knows that. They see that. Oh, prices dropped by $30,000. Well, the immediate thought is, what's wrong with it? Why were they not able to sell it? How many people? They have all these people that came through. I mean, it was on the market for 4 months, 6 months at this price. And what is wrong with it that they couldn't sell it at that they had to drop that price? And already, first impression is one of suspicion. And a lot of realtors, they take that approach anyhow. They're like, just see, what do you think? Oh, that you think it's worth this, and they don't want to upset the client. They're trying to get the client to utilize them, and they're like, nope, I want to sell it for this, and they're like, okay, we'll do it. Emily Johnson doesn't operate that way. She knows, based on the market and her experience, what will work, and she's going to be honest with you about that. And if you want someone to blow sunshine up your nose all day long and have your house on the market for 2 years, then you can go with a lot of other people. But if you want somebody that's going to look out for you as priority number one, make sure that you sell that house for what it's absolutely worth, then you need Emily Johnson, House Theory Realty. 1997. I was talking about in the last hour the ads, pharmaceutical ads. And I love these cultural shifts that we have, and how as a culture we demand one thing and then we get it, and then after a while we're ticked off and we demand it go back the way that it was before, not because we recognize that we made a mistake, but just because we don't like it. And we, paper bags, plastic bags, out in California see this a lot. The whole reason for plastic bags for groceries at one point was because environmentalists said that was the answer to save the planet, because we were just going to chop down all the trees for these paper bags. So we had to move away from paper bags and go to plastic bags. Then those same environmentalists, sometime down the road, like, plastic bags are awful. They're going to destroy the planet. We need renewable product. We need to go back to paper sacks. The same people. We complain about all the pharmaceutical ads on television. But once upon a time, we didn't have that. And that was because the rules in place said that if you advertise pharmaceuticals, you have to put like all of the different things that could go wrong. And print ads, that was possible because you could have all the little fine print. But when it came to, particularly when traditionally 30 or 60-second ads, that was all that was available, that just wasn't possible. And in 1997, I know it was around the late 90s, the FDA changed the rules saying that, okay, well, you got to list some of the bad things, but then as long as you provide for people a place where they can learn about all of this stuff, then you can run ads. And that's when the big explosion began, because it allowed for the pharmaceutical companies to go ahead and utilize television and radio for advertising their product. Now, there was a push for it. This wasn't in a vacuum. It wasn't the pharmaceutical companies that were just sitting there trying to figure out ways against the will of people and politicians to advertise to them. There was a stereotype, fair or not, that there was this too cozy of a relationship between pharmaceutical companies and doctors. And pharmaceutical companies would come in and wine and dine the doctors and send them on these nice little excursions and trips. And it was all in exchange for them promoting their drugs. And people at large worried that They were only learning about the drugs that the doctors were willing to tell them about because of the cozy relationship with the pharmaceutical companies. So if you were thinking about a corrupt nature of the system, the corruption would be whom, you have a doctor like, you want me to push your drugs? You got to wine and dime me, baby. And of course, in any industry, you're going to have people that take advantage of it. And even well-meaning human beings that can be swayed. So the argument was direct-to-consumer communication. And then the consumer at least knows the drug. The doctor doesn't have to prescribe it. But then the consumer knows. So the consumer, hey, I've got high blood pressure, or I'm a fatty, or I've got whatever, and I saw this drug advertisement. Is this something right for me? And then the doctor can say, well, actually, I don't think so. Here's why. This is good for people who have this condition, and while you have this condition, you also have this going on. So it's not really meant for someone like you. Or they could say, yeah, actually, that we can try that. Because oftentimes there are, many of you know this, there's a number of different approaches that can be taken, and sometimes it's a guess and check method. You've got certain conditions, you've got certain, um, ailments or whatever, and so there's a number of different. Well, it could be this, it could be that. We'll try you on this, and we'll see how that works, and then we'll revisit in a month. And if it brings down this, then okay. But if not, well, okay, we'll try this other thing. And so there are oftentimes different approaches, and there's a lot of drugs out there. Is it a perfect system? Is it? I just figure, in my mind, one, free country. But at the same time, the more that anybody knows, the more information a person has, the better. For some people, it's not, because, then they overthink it, and then they want to try everything. But that's where your doctor, as the expert, comes in and says, no, I don't think so. I'm like, well, I demand it. Well, you're going to have to find another doctor then. See? That's how all that works. We've got weather coming up in a moment. Streaming live, KSGF.com right now. Latest news update.
And the first alert forecast from Ozarks First meteorologist Tom Schmidt, sponsored by St. Clair the Ozarks Home Improvements. Today we'll see patchy fog, otherwise sunny skies with a high near 81. Tonight mostly clear with a low around 64. For your Wednesday, sunny with a high near 87. And looking into Thursday, mostly sunny with a high near 86.
White South African refugees welcomed into the U.S. by the Department of State and Department of Homeland Security yesterday as President Donald Trump condemned the genocide that is taking place against them. There are two groupings of individuals, both that should be, quote, protected from genocide, but are not. Christians and whites. You can, and it happens all the time, Middle East in particular. Christians get slaughtered, entire villages, because they're Christian. And we're like, well, it happens. Entities like the United Nations and all these other, virtue signaling organizations that talk about protecting groupings of people from discrimination. It doesn't bother them at all. And white people. Slaughter them left and right. And that's what happens in South Africa. It is open season, and it has been for some time, on white people in South Africa. Now, some time ago, in the name of equity, the government in South Africa, for those that don't know the history on this, decided that what was best for South Africans was to take away farms from the people who produced food and give it to people who oftentimes had absolutely no experience or background in farming whatsoever, but they were black. And so it was a way to make everything equitable. And all of this, again, is built upon, this is DEI stuff. That there are oppressors and there are the oppressed. And the white people are the oppressors, and people who are non-white are the oppressed. And as usual, the irony is it's the other way around. People who are white farmers in South Africa get slaughtered, raped, tortured as a pastime oftentimes in South Africa. There are songs that are well known, like here in the United States, everyone knows Happy Birthday. There's a few songs that if you start singing it at an event, everyone's going to be able to join in because everyone knows this song. YMCA is one of them. In South Africa, there's songs about slaughtering white people because they're white. This is the culture. This is, by the way, the reason for the entire concept of a refugee system in the United States. We have just completely abused the term and definition and purpose behind refugees to where it has largely been used to just let anyone come into this country illegally, oftentimes, because they don't like it where they live. We've heard people on the left in particular welcome refugees in the name of climate change. The refugee concept was set up in order to rescue people who were based off of nothing that they could control whatsoever because of the country they lived in. Their life was in danger. And I'm not talking about the existential threat of climate change or, well, because they don't have universal health care, but as in, because you're white, you could have your home broken into and have your wife raped in front of you, your children beheaded, and then you lit on fire just because you're white. And those are the things that happen in South Africa. That's what a refugee system was set up for. It was to protect people who were, if they did not get out of there, they're going to be dead. And by the way, that's why part of the refugee system required that person just escape to whatever the next closest country is so that they're safe, and then they can apply from there to have refugee status in the United States. That's something that the Biden administration changed, saying that, no, you can just come on in, skip the safe harbor, come straight here into the United States. This is an interesting development, because it involves Trump, it's getting attention. This isn't anything new that has been occurring, and it would be really interesting to see the coverage if Trump were to start highlighting Christian refugees from some of these Middle Eastern countries in particular that get slaughtered for being Christian. Because I suspect that there's a significant portion of the American population that has no idea, and even the world, no idea what goes on in South Africa, and no idea that in this world, essentially, it is fair game in parts of the world if you want to slaughter en masse Christians for being Christians and white people for being white. Now, 59. There's I think roughly 40, 50, 60,000 white farmers that are in existence in South Africa at this point. And 59 of them were given refugee status into the United States. There are people pitching a fit about this on the left, largely because they're white. Oh, well, so Trump allows it. You know, we have spent years welcoming gang members into this country, terrorists into this country. And now you've got a few dozen completely legit refugee status human beings. Like the reason refugee programs were set up. And now, all of a sudden, there's questions about, well, now, I mean, what's the real reason here? Should these people really have been given refugee status? Are you serious? Has DEI been so effective that simply because, we have let tens of millions of people of color without any sort of background check whatsoever into this country, but because 59 white people whose lives legitimately are in danger are allowed in after thorough background checks, and that we have a problem with because they're white? Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau and Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security Troy Edgar visited Washington Dulles International Airport in Northern Virginia outside of Washington, D.C. to meet the group, which included families with small children. By the way, these families were vetted and are actually like mom and dad with small kids, not some 22-year-old with MS-13 gang tats all over himself with 18 kids in tow. The 59 South American, and just listen to the difference. Do you know what they were doing when they arrived? They were waving American flags. You juxtapose that to the illegals that have taken to the streets and oftentimes blocking highways while waving flags of foreign countries in the United States. And that we're supposed to just welcome with open arms. But actual families fleeing slaughter while waving American flags, well, I mean, they're white. In his order, Trump blasted, quote, countless government policies designed to dismantle equal opportunity in employment, education, and business, and hateful rhetoric and government actions fueling disproportionate violence against racially disfavored landowners. Speaking with Breitbart News shortly after the refugee boarded the government-chartered flight, Landau stated that white South Africans, including some of the new arrivals, were victims of unjust racial discrimination and violence. The president made it clear that Africans in South Africa who were the victims of unjust racial discrimination would be welcome to come to the United States, and he's delivering on that promise. The deputy and I just spoke to some of the folks who arrived on the flight, and they tell quite harrowing stories of the violence they face in South Africa that was not progressed by the authorities, but the unjust application of the law. The U.S., as we were proud to say, stands for equal justice under the law and the fair and impartial application of the law. And again, this is a group that has not experienced that and has, to the contrary, experienced violence and really feared for their lives in South Africa. They were subject to very serious, egregious, and targeted threats, and we wish them well in their journey in the United States. We underscored for them that the American people are a welcoming and generous people, and we underscore the importance of assimilation into the United States, which is one of the very important factors we look to in refugee admissions and through the resettlement program for these folks who were vetted while in South Africa. And we're sending a clear message that the United States really rejects the egregious persecution of people on the basis of race in South Africa, and we welcome these people into the U.S. into a new future. Now, who can be opposed to this? Well, apparently, a lot of people on the left. And we know why. It's DEI. White people are oppressors. You can't bring in white people can't be victims. White people can't be refugees. Apparently, and I think this is a huge shocker for a lot of people, and I guess it was to me as well, though I find increasingly, even when I think I'm shocked, I'm not really that shocked. The Episcopal Church has ended the refugee partnership with the U.S. government because of this, citing moral opposition to resettling white Africans from South Africa. We'll share their statement coming up next. And I'm not an Episcopalian, so I don't even know how the hierarchy works, how much autonomy local Episcopalian churches have. But apparently, if you're white, you're on your own. I know of course, different churches have different Bibles. This may be teachings of Christ that I'm not familiar with, that we should help everyone. Unless you're white, then, screw you. Not really sure. But I suspect, and frankly, I hope that this is a surprise to a lot of people, because it really worries me increasingly the level of racism in this country that masquerades as virtue. And that some of these institutions that should lead the way against this sort of racism instead are leading the charge towards it and for it. So more on the Episcopalian Church position on this coming up. I'm Nick Reed. Premier Landscaping Service in the area. Look no further. Hunter Hardscapes and Outdoor, landscaping, outdoor living space design. I know I constantly refer to it as outdoor living space, but that is what it can become. My perspective on all of this has changed as a homeowner who has a lot of yard. A lot of people, I've got the type of neighborhood where you can see other people's backyards, and it's very clear that some people have taken advantage of that piece of land that's expensive. Land is not cheap. When you look at buying a lot, it is expensive, yet they just do nothing with it. And then others are like, I'm going to take advantage of this. This is an additional room for some people, it's the biggest room in their house. And it's an outdoor living area. Pavers, patios, retaining walls, sod installation, drainage solutions, landscape lighting. You can have it designed in any fashion that is imaginable. And Hunter Hardscapes and Outdoor, they are the folks to do it for you. Now, plan ahead, because they do it right, and something worth doing right is doing well. And that means that you're not going to get the job done in a couple of weeks. So come mid into summer, fall even, if you're thinking that would be a great time to have this done, I'd reach out to them now. Hunter Hardscapes and Outdoor, you can find them, hunterhardscapes.com, also Nick's endorsements, ksgf.com.
Springfield's Talk 1041, the first alert forecast from Ozarks First meteorologist Tom Schmidt, sponsored by Wolfpack Cleaners, your residential and commercial cleaning professionals. Today we'll see sunny skies with a high near 81. Tonight mostly clear with a low around 64. For your Wednesday, sunny with a high near 87. And looking ahead to Thursday, mostly sunny with a high near 86.
Yesterday, the Trump administration welcomed 59 South African nationals who, for a lot of people, their original sin is being white, and definitely in South Africa. This is what the refugee concept was developed for. People who, because of a unavoidable status, are under threat of torture or death. And it is very common in South Africa for white people to be tracked down, hunted. There are songs about it. I mean, this is part of the culture down there. And it is inflamed by the government under this concept that white people are oppressors. And so, of course, oppressors are always bad. They're always wrong by the nature of being the oppressor, and they can never be victims, which is great if you are the victim, because you can do whatever you want to them, and they're not a victim. These families, which are actual families, like a mom and a dad and kids, arrive here waving U.S. flags, But a lot of people on the left are upset because, well, why were these people picked? Is it just because they're white? Well, by default, because that's why they're being targeted. So, yeah, I guess. I mean, it's not that they're being chosen for refugee status because they're white. It is that because their lives are in danger because they've been targeted for being white. This is not a difficult concept to understand. Unless you have a DEI mind, in which there are good and bad, and certain people should be protected and others should not. And apparently, according to the Episcopal Church, white people should not be protected. This is a letter that was written by the Most Reverend Sean Rowe, R-O-W-E. This is from Religion News. And what has occurred here is the Episcopal Church announced yesterday that it was going to sever its nearly 40-year partnership with the U.S. government to resettle refugees, all because they do not want to participate in resettling these 59 white people. This is from the letter. Quote, since January, the previously bipartisan U.S. refugee admissions program in which we participate has essentially shut down. Virtually no new refugees have arrived. Hundreds of staff in resettlement agencies around the country have been laid off, and funding for resettling refugees who have already arrived have been uncertain. Then, just over 2 weeks ago, the federal government informed Episcopal Migration Ministries that under the terms of our federal grant, we're expected to resettle white Africans from South Africa, whom the U.S. government has classified as refugees. In light of our church's steadfast commitment to racial justice, there it is, and reconciliation, and our historic ties with the Anglican Church of South Africa, we're not able to take this step. Accordingly, we have determined that by the end of the federal fiscal year, we will conclude our refugee resettlement grant agreement with the U.S. federal government. They go on to masquerade their racism somehow as being Christian, saying as Christians we must be guided not by political vagaries, but by the sure and certain knowledge that the kingdom of God is revealed to us in the struggle of those on the margins, well, except for white people, of course. Jesus tells us to care for the poor and vulnerable as we would care for him, and we must follow that command right now. What that means is ending our participation in the federal government's refugee resettlement program and investing our resources in serving migrants in other ways. Now, what their argument is, because of the twisted minds of the people running the church, is despite the fact that I don't even know it's got to be 99.9999999% of refugees coming into this country under refugee status, the vast majority, which aren't even really refugees, but they use that as a way to get in, are people of color. And with the new immigration enforcement, this is their beef. Among other things, the Trump administration has begun reviewing refugee status in the way that it is supposed to be reviewed. Are these really, truly legitimate refugees? I know that's crazy, right? Are people applying for refugee status doing so because they really, truly are being targeted because of their class or category? Now, that is a change in this country because during previous administrations, we have allowed people to claim refugee status because of anything and everything that they wanted to. It didn't make any difference. They could say, well, I'm worried if I go back. Look at the MS-13 gang member. His argument was, as an MS-13 gang member, I'm worried that Trains de Aragua will kill me. And Democrats to this day defend that as a refugee status. Well, you're in a gang, you're in a violent gang. Well, yeah, that's pretty dangerous, so we'll accept you in. in this introduction of legitimizing refugee status by the Trump administration and saying no longer does everyone just get to say I'm a refugee because of climate change or whatever else, but you actually have to be, by the definition that is set up by our own codes and laws, you have to be a legitimate refugee. And the first ones, since we have begun really enforcing these rules, these immigration rules, that have applied and qualified happen to be white people. And that apparently is a real problem for the Episcopal Church. I don't even know what. There is a level of darkness that has apparently infected the leadership of the Episcopal Church. That's evil. Now, I don't think they realize they're evil, but this is how evil oftentimes works. It takes people that may be normal people and whispers in their ear constantly until they believe good is bad and bad is good. That's how the devil works. And when you have an institution that openly acknowledges that it will refuse to help resettle refugees after 40 years because of the color of their skin, and they cloak themselves in the teachings of Christ in order to justify it, that is the devil. Springfield's Talk 104.1, I'm Nick Reed. Pinnaker Honda, Memorial Day is going to be coming around the corner, and synonymous with Memorial Day, well, you got all sorts of great deals on vehicles, or so they tell you. Sometimes they really are. That and mattresses. I don't know what the deal is with that. Mattresses and cars and mattresses. Sometimes washers and dryers, like big appliances. I guess you can throw that in there as well. But how about this? New 2025 Honda HR-V, $299 a month. That's not lease. That's to own, $299 a month. Seemed like, I don't know, after COVID, just because of supply chain and everything, is like, if you get $500 a month on a new vehicle, you're lucky. $299 a month. New CRV, $398 a month, not a lease. And for certified pre-owned vehicles, 0.99% APR. And part of a summer promotion, free fuel for the summer with every new car purchase. That's just a taste of what you get from the good people over at Pinnaker Honda on South Campbell, just south of Walnut Lawn. I wanted to read a message on the Pyramid Roofing Company talk and text line regarding the talk about the refugees from South Africa. I was just in South Africa last month. I was actually a little concerned about going because of everything going on. While we were over there, I asked our hunting guide, who was clearly pretty conservative and outspoken, about his viewpoint on everything was actually very interesting to me. He did not act all that concerned about it. His view on the land being taken from farmers was that the government had passed some policies that were allowing them to take unused idle land, like land inherited, that was just sitting, and again, didn't seem to be concerned about it. I'm not sure if this would be the result of government-controlled media. I've seen some videos online of African leaders making statements that seem very concerning. It was just very interesting to me to hear his point of view and lack of concern. This is, it's the, I guess, to use an analogy that perhaps is overused, it's the frog in the boiling water. We become accustomed to our environments, and even if we recognize oftentimes that it's wrong, the emotional reaction to it over time diminishes. For example, you and I live in this area, and we talk about and recognize the insanity of crime in somewhere like Chicago, right? We're like, what is wrong with these people? It's like a war zone. Every weekend, 18 people shot, 12 people shot, 14 people killed. But even you, recognizing from afar and thinking that is insane. How is it that people live like that? If you move there after probably about a year or so, you would still shake your head and think, yeah, that's just pretty bad. But it would not have that same emotional impact on you. If you go as a tourist to visit New York City and you see the reality of the news stories, you know, oh, here's an illegal immigrant, raped a dead guy on the train, which actually happened a few weeks ago. Or, oh, here's someone that was asleep and they were lit on fire while they were alive. Or this person, was stabbed on the train. And so you think to yourself, well, like hell, I'm going to ride that train. The subway, are you out of your mind? But people who live there, they do it every day. Because even though they recognize that it's wrong and it's bad, you get used to it. And I'd say that it's going to be the same in South Africa, even amongst a lot of people that are probably even white farmers, that it really hasn't necessarily directly affected them. And so, yeah, it's bad and it's a little bit scary. But they aren't necessarily in an area where they're constantly harassed and followed at night and being threatened by people, and they've got a wife and kids. And so it's not uncommon to have any sort of area in which people live in a culture that is really bad and discriminatory and even dangerous against certain groups of people. But when you are there and you talk to the people there, if they're not like actually directly threatened by it themselves or have been, then you kind of become used to it. It's I guess put it maybe for some people in a more personal way, it's like somebody in an abusive relationship. Oftentimes there are people that before they were in that relationship would think to themselves, man, I can't believe that she stayed with him. I would never take that. I would never. The first time that I was dating a guy and he hit me, I'd be right out that door. And then it happens. And while some people do, others find themselves years into an abusive relationship and they just learn to deal with it. And it's not something they like, and they may know it's wrong, but they become so accustomed to it and so worn down that it just doesn't have the same emotional impact that it did when they were on the outside looking in. And so now, of course, this person who texted that in relaying that story, obviously I don't know that specific person or their circumstances, but I do know that it is possible for people to be in the middle of an environment that is very devastating and damage, but get beaten down or just used to it over time to where it doesn't seem as big of a deal as it might to people who are on the outside. Springfield's Talk 1041, I'm Nick Reed. Sarah Myers.
Thank you, Foreman Mechanical Heating and Air. It's going to be a hot one this week. And if today.
Gonna be a hot one.
If today or tomorrow. Stop. If today or tomorrow you finally break. You can't handle it no more. If it's the first time you turn on your AC this year and nothing, don't stress, don't panic. I want to recommend Russell and his team over at Foreman Mechanical Heating and Air. They're quick, they're fast, and they're affordable, and they don't pressure you either. If they can fix something, they will, but if it is time to go ahead and do that upgrade, they're going to let you know. I know this to be true. My AC unit is 28 years old, and I know it is time for an upgrade, but the Foreman team, they've never pressured me to make that purchase. So if it is time for an AC tune-up or you have a repair that needs to be addressed, remember Foreman Mechanical Heating and Air for all of your HVAC needs. Now you can find all of the contact information for Foreman Mechanical under the Sarah's Endorsements tab at ksgf.com.
Yeah, this is so aggravating. I'm trying to...
What?
Oh, there we go. Oh, I was sending myself an article for tomorrow that I came across, some subject matter for tomorrow's show prep, but I couldn't, I don't know. It wasn't working for me, but I got it to work. It's all good. It's all good. I'm already ahead of the curve for tomorrow. Gavin Newsom, who's running for president, obviously, unveiled an aggressive plan to clear homeless encampments across California. Don't you just love it when these people on the left decide to run for a higher office and all of a sudden they decide to start doing their job? It reminds me of me when I was in high school or junior high. And I was kind of a procrastinator, and it would result oftentimes in, I mean, I graduated with, a National Honor Society, all that sort of stuff. But only because I had a number of teachers that were generous enough to come to me at some point and say, if you don't start kicking it into gear now, you're not going to get an A for the semester. And then I would start kicking it into gear. I just, I was a procrastinator, and I was very social. And so oftentimes my top priority was not, in the moment, focusing on academics until I realized that, there's a deadline here. And if I don't start now, then I'm not going to get an A. And A's were, that was my priority, were to get A's. That's what these Democrat politicians are like oftentimes. This is what Gavin Newsom is like. These are all things that you should have been doing. And honestly, they're things that he has in the past said that he was going to do. But it's now all of a sudden this newfound, I got a new plan here. Like, have you not been governor all this time? Newsom released details about his multi-billion-dollar plan to tackle the homeless crisis in the Golden State. More money, bigger government, more money. And what has that resulted in thus far? More homelessness. So at least this is consistent for someone in government who is specifically a Democrat. When you try something and you use the taxpayer dollars to do it and it doesn't work, then you say, let's do more of it. Newsom shared a model ordinance for cities and counties to immediately address dangerous and unhealthy encampments and connect people experiencing homelessness with shelter and services, saying there's nothing compassionate about letting people die in the streets. Local leaders asked for resources. We delivered. The largest state investment in history. They asked for legal clarity. The courts delivered. Now we're giving them a model they can put to work immediately with urgency, with humanity, to resolve encampments and connect people to shelter, housing, and care. The time for inaction is over. There are no more excuses. It's like he's running for governor for the first time. This isn't a, hey, we realized where we went wrong. He's acting like he's not. This is another thing Democrats do. They're in office. They're in charge. The landscape around them is the result of their policies. And then they lecture themselves, or what would be them. They get up there and they're like, this is unacceptable. The time for excuses. Where are these excuses coming from? Who's been the problem up until now? Oh, and this is great. 3.5 months after fires were put out, Los Angeles. We talked last week about Mandy Moore, the actress, and she's a lefty. She's an actress in Hollywood, celebrity. posting about how just insane and incomprehensible it is, the difficulties that they're going through just trying to rebuild. They're ready to rebuild. They've been ready to rebuild. They have the resources to do it. They want to do it. There's only one thing stopping them. It's government, Democrat-run government. The same government that people like Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass said, don't you worry, we're going to cut out all the red tape. National Review has a story. 3.5 months after, it's like, okay, we're ready to reset, restart. Seven permits for rebuilding have been issued. Only 7. This is the Democrats' version of, don't worry, we're going to really make things effective for you. We're going to make sure they're efficient. We're going to cut all the red tape for you. 7. Glenn Beck's coming up next. Talk with you tomorrow. I'm Nick Reed.